Okay, I want to make sure we've got a review on what happened on this past Wednesday. We were having technical problems, so I just wanted to give a quick review, and hopefully within 5 minutes I can have everybody caught up with Genesis. We're going 29 through 32. So we started our review last week with Genesis 29 with Jacob on the move after being told by his mom earlier to get out of here and go to live with my brother Laban. Jacob ends up at a watering site and asks the people if they know Laban, and they say yes. And here comes his daughter now to water the sheep. And so this is really the story of him meeting Rachel. Jacob is totally enamored with Rachel and kisses her. He tells her who he is, and he eventually meets Laban and says, I want to work with this girl. I want to work for this girl. He said, I would work for this girl 7 years. You got any girls you would work for 7 years for? Laban says, cool, that'll work. And so in our deception of deceiver Jacob, then we say the player gets played. And then after 7 years, Jacob is tricked into marrying Laban's oldest daughter Leah instead of Rachel. Laban says, I'll give you Rachel for another 7 years of work. And Jacob says, cool, that'll work. By the end of the chapter, Jacob has both wives and he favors Rachel over Leah. And because of this, God allows Leah to begin having children and not Rachel. By the end of this chapter, Leah has 4 sons for Jacob: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Chapter 30. In chapter 30, two things are being made: babies and deals. Remember, Jacob is the supplanter. He can come up with some things. But the big thing is the babies that have been made. You know, when we got to this chapter, of course, 4 sons have already been born at this point to Leah. Rachel is jealous that Leah is having all the babies, and she tells Jacob to give me a child or I'll die. Jacob says, girl, really, you're tripping. I'm not God. To which she responds, well, have a child by my handmaid. And of course, Jacob says, cool, that'll work. And once again, we get that handmaid thing that had happened to their grandfather, Abraham. That's what Sarah said. But this starts a string of what I call handmaid baby wars. Rachel gives her handmaid to Jacob, and she has 2 kids, Dan and Naphtali. And then Leah gets jealous and gives her handmaid, Zilpah, to Jacob, and she has 2 more sons, Gad and Asher. So if you're keeping score right now, that's 8 sons total that have been born. The baby making wars are in full swing at this point, so much so that when Reuben goes into the field and picks some mandrakes, they fight over who they belong to. And Leah says, you already stole my husband, you're going to steal my mandrakes too? So pretty confrontational. It was heated. So when Jacob gets home, Leah has a mandrake, so she gets the man and she conceives again that night and has her 5th son, Issachar, followed by a 6th son, Zebulun, for a total now of 10 sons for Jacob. Leah then had a daughter, Dinah. God then gives Rachel another son, Joseph, for a total of 11 sons, and she says that God will give her another one. So this was promised but hasn't happened yet. For now, the baby making is done and the deal making begins. And let's not forget, all this is happening in his house, and he's still got Esau to deal with. This is happening inside his family, and he's still got to deal with this issue of Esau, which will be coming up. Okay? So the deal making. After Rachel had Joseph, Jacob goes to Laban and says, give me my stuff, let me go find my own place to live. To which Laban says in so many words, no, you need to stay here because I prosper because of you. Tell me how much I need to pay you to keep you here. Jacob is not feeling it and acknowledges that you didn't have anything when I came here, and now you are prosperous, and that's because of me. So let me take my stuff and go. Laban says again, what do I need to give you to keep you here? And Jacob says, give me nothing. Let's work a deal. Imagine that. Jacob saying, let's work a deal. Okay? Jacob says, I'll take all the less perfect livestock and leave you with the good ones. Laban says, cool, that'll work. And then Jacob creates this process by which all of the imperfect livestock, the ones he chose, begin multiplying like crazy if they were strong. You know, he only did that for the ones that were good. He said, I'm going to get them to multiply. But if they weren't, then they became the ones left for Laban and were more feeble. Thus Jacob amassed a herd of strong, imperfect livestock, which meant great wealth. That's Jacob doing his thing. Jacob, coming up with plans and executing them. Jacob using his gift. And so the final verse in 43, final verse 43 in chapter 30 says, and the man increased exceedingly and had much cattle and maidservants and men servants and camels and asses. Jacob basically prospered. So when we get to chapter 31, it begins with the word on the streets coming from Laban's sons, and they've been watching how Jacob is prospering, and they're saying that he's inappropriately taking their dad's stuff. He's taking their dad's wealth. Jacob sees that Laban is acting funny towards him as well, so Jacob calls his wives together so he can update them on the plan. Jacob starts out by telling his wives, "You don't know how I've served your father." He then makes a very key point in verse 5 where he says, "But the God of my father hath been with me." He goes on to talk about how their father has been deceptive, and he details out to them the deal they made with the cattle and how God blessed him in that deal. He then says, "We need to leave." His wives are with him, and they simply respond to him that he should do what God is telling him. So they're supportive of Jacob. So in verses 17 and 18, Jed loaded up the truck and moved to Beverly. All right, so that's Joshua. He loaded everything up, and this is and they move out to Canaan, where his dad is. But of course, that's also where Esau is. All right, and one of the key things he says is there. Remember that the God of my father hath been with me. So he's making God moves now, and he's doing things because God is saying it, rather than him just leaving things up to himself. So Jacob leaves without Laban knowing it, and it wasn't until 3 days later that he is told that Jacob left with all his stuff, and Laban took off after him. When he finds him 7 days later, he semi-threatens him, but says, "Your God told me not to do anything good or bad to you." He fakes that he really didn't want to harm you, but that I'm looking for my gods. And so after his little threat didn't work, he says, "I'm looking for my gods." Uh, at this at this point, Jacob is a little upset. Jacob didn't know that Rachel had taken those gods. So after Laban goes through all their stuff and doesn't find anything, Jacob lashes out at him verbally and tells him how dishonest he was from the beginning and how he doesn't appreciate all of Jacob's work and the prosperity that he brought to you. And if it wasn't for my God, you would have sent me away with nothing. And so Laban backs down and says, "Look, you got to understand, these are my daughters. It's right for me to care for them this way." And he ends up saying, "Let's make a deal." Jacob agrees, and they do the pillar thing, and where they set up a pillar and make an agreement that they won't go beyond that pillar to do harm to each other. Then they had a party late that night to celebrate the covenant, and then Laban rose the next morning and went back home in peace. So that ends 31, and in chapter 32, we get to the Jacob wrestling with God. Jacob is headed to his dad's place, but he still has his brother to contend with, Esau. The first two verses of this passage are kind of confusing, but it says that as Jacob went on his way, these angels of God met him. He called that place Mahanaim, I believe it was. I looked it up, and it means two camps. It seems Jacob was given courage to see his brother because he had God's camp and his own camp. So those two camps were God's camp and his own camp, and that what gave him the courage to run up on Esau. The long and short of it is that Jacob had gifts and words to communicate to Esau, but before he would ever see him. So he had everyone and everything prepared, and he sent them forth, and he was alone, and there he met the angel of God. So Genesis 32:24, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. It appears that this man, can't finish off Jacob, so he breaks his thigh bone or something like that. And the angel man says, "Let me go." And Jacob says, "Not until you bless me." So the angel asks Jacob his name, and Jacob says, "Jacob." The angel man says, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed." It basically saying you've wrestled with the power of God and you have prevailed. However, from then on, it seems that Jacob had a halt or a limp in his step because of the injury he received wrestling with the man of God. So that ends chapter 32, and in 33 we finally get to the reunion of Esau and Jacob, and so that's kind of a review. A lot of bright points there, but the biggest one is I think Jacob's connection with God through all of this. Uh, he talks about the God of his father, and that's different because when Laban talks, Laban said, "Your God told me not to mess with you." So evidently they're talking about the same God because Jacob is saying the God of my father, and Laban, who is a Syrian, says your God. Remember, he's pagan. He's looking for his gods and all that. He's not got the same God. So very important. I'll review that, and we'll start again next week. And by the way, next week will be our last one before we go on a Christmas break. And so we'll get up to chapter 37. So we'll go from 33 through to 37. We'll see you then.